almost the 51st state, Canada, and the Schengen-style zone. That is your topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Mac Pillory, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas, and welcome back to the LMI podcast, where we talk about law and conflict resolution topics. And today we have Andy Semotiuk, who's back to talk immigration law and international law. And this time we're going to be talking about Canada and some of the news that's been happening about it, especially from U.S. President Donald Trump, labeling it the 51st state. How serious is the president? That won't be the talk today. The talk's going to be, well, how close can we get to maybe satisfying the president in a way that benefits both Canadians and Americans? So that's our chat. Andy, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. And this is a great topic to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me screen share. And so, of course, everybody, you can check out Andy at thepacelawfirm.com. It's actually pacelawfirm.com, making sure It's not The Pace, it's pacelawfirm.com. And I am putting it on my screen real quick. So Andy obviously does immigration law. He is a lawyer who's licensed not just in the U.S. and California and New York, but also in Ontario and what's the other?
BC.
And British Columbia in Canada. And so you are a savant of both nations and you know both countries really well. So you're a perfect person to speak on this topic. And so you wrote a recent article on Forbes entitled Strengthening U.S. Immigration While Respecting Canada's Sovereignty. And so this is a topic that I wanted you to talk about today. And let's get started. Why do you believe that the U.S. and Canada would benefit from a Schengen-style zone, and what is the Schengen zone?
Oh, great question. Well, if you've ever traveled to Europe, you'll know what the Schengen zone is, because when you go there, the countries are all aligned in such a way that you don't have to show your passport every time you're going from one country to another, for example, from Italy to France or whatever. And there's a kind of a free economic zone involved where people can move from, let's say, Paris to Rome and go to work in Rome, even though they're not citizens of Italy, and likewise for Italians with respect to France. So it's kind of a economic zone where there are no impediments to movement of people and goods. And the idea is larger economies of scale result, and the free movement of people back and forth make economics work a little better. I guess that's the essence of it. So in terms of talking about America and the United States and the topic you've raised about Canada becoming the 51st state, that's been a non-starter over here in Canada. I'm in Toronto, and I can tell you, we just had an election last night in Ontario, our province, where the provincial premier-elect, and who was the former premier and was re-elected, has come out with statements like Canada's not for sale. We're going to stand strong and oppose tariffs and so on. And the reason why this discussion is so significant right now for at least Canadians, but also I believe for Americans, is because President Trump has declared that he's going to impose severe or strict tariffs on Canada, 25%, coming up in the next couple of days in March. And it's going to be economic dislocation, like on steroids for Canada if those tariffs are implemented. And it will impact severely on some American states at least, because there will be counter tariffs put into place. And just today, uh, there's a campaign
And
out in
today
Canada,
today is February 28th, 2025.
right? Today, there's a campaign in Canada to not buy anything from any American store in Canada. Walmart, you name
Yeah.
it, McDonald's, whatever it is, no buying any goods or getting any services from American institutions in Canada or commercial, companies in Canada as a one-day kind of a protest over this impending tariff business. So the question, I guess, and forgive me for kind of
No, you're good.
waltzing along, but I think the big question is how can we live together in peace and harmony and both prosper, both countries prosper best? And so I wrote this article, which incidentally got a lot of negative response from Canadians in particular about possibly creating this Schengen zone in North America between Canada and the United States as an alternative to the current USMCA free trade agreement, which is
Yeah.
coming up for renewal in a year or two.
Yes. Well, I saw some of the points that you raised. And so thank you for sharing that you got some feedback that you weren't maybe expecting from fellow Canadians.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Almost Benedict Arnold out here,
Oh, my goodness. Well, I plan to be in your beautiful country pretty soon. And so I might get the temperature down there
Yeah.
in more ways than one, so to speak.
Hopefully, he won't be harmed.
Yeah. So some of the points you raise and the reasons that you think that this might be a good idea is number one, enhanced border security.
Yes,
Number two, increase labor mobility, which you kind of touched on economically. Number three, economic growth through talent exchange. Number four, simplified immigration processing.
yeah,
And finally, number five, enhanced refugee and asylum coordination.
yeah.
So it seems that the U.S. and Canada is already intertwined in all of these. But
It
so,
is.
in what ways would what you're proposing change things that much?
Well, for example, let's just talk about sort of border security. So instead of having a border security in the case of America and the north and south borders, um, and Canada having the south border and flights coming in and so on, what we would have is a sort of a perimeter of joint enforcement around North America, well, Canada and the United States. So, an entry from Europe, if you entered either Canada or the United States, you'd be inspected at the pre clearance
Yeah,
airport and you would be granted permission to come to wherever you're flying to, but you would be able to travel, let's say, from New York to Toronto or
yeah.
vice versa
So
without
less,
without any issues.
yeah. So less TSA style checks when you're going from Canada to the U.S., but
Right,
you have to still go through it if you're coming from another country that's outside of those two.
right,
Sort of like when you go to Germany or you go to France, you check in one time through the massive security, but then after that, you're able to travel through Europe pretty easily without having to go through customs again.
right.
Right. So I've done that many times. And so I think it would definitely make life a whole lot easier for people who would be traveling through the two countries. So that's enhanced security. Your last point, I believe, or one of the points you made in your article is that this would also free up the need to, I guess, guard the northern border so the U.S. could then focus its attention on the southern border, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a key thing, I think. Well, from an American point of view, I would say if you could focus on the southern border and clean that up, which has been a hard struggle so far, just to allocate the resources for that purpose and not be worried about, well, what's happening on the northern border. I think that would help a lot. Plus, um, hopefully, with a joint perimeter securing North America. Now, North America also includes Mexico, but I'm
Yeah.
not arguing that Mexico should be part of this Schengen North American
Yeah. No,
style.
that's clear from the article.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or perhaps somebody could say, you're not arguing it yet.
Yeah, that's
Right.
correct. Yeah. Um, but the security, it seems to me, and I'm sort of dancing around in the security area a bit as well because I'm in touch with people who are involved in the security aspects of U.S. and Canadian relations and border protection. Um, it seems to me that it would be able to, such a an agreement, if it could be reached, would strengthen Canada in terms of blocking, for example, these cartels that are trying to move their way into Canada and set up shop in Canada for fentanyl dealing and stuff like that. But there's a major problem, and that is America's got to decide whether it wants to be a free and democratic country or not. Because it makes no sense for Canada to ally with a country that's going in the direction of a dictatorship. And if the rule of law is not going to mean anything in the United States, it there's no argument for uniting the U.S. and Canada in any economic union of some sort.
Well, let's talk about that economically. So, as you know, tariffs, as you mentioned, has been big in the news. And the US's argument, well, Donald Trump's argument, was that Canadians depend on the US in a way that's unfair to Americans, and that there will be no Canada if the US was basically not keeping it alive, economically, so to speak. So, how does this, I guess, satisfy that concern that many Americans might have?
Uh, I think there's a miscalculation in Washington, or perhaps in the Trump White House, as to um, the lack of benefit that Americans have from Canadians being their northern partners. Just a few examples. Maybe one would be when 9/11 happened. Canada became the airport for all of these jet airliners that were flying overseas and didn't know what to do or where to land. And there was even a Broadway play that came out of it, where they talk about Newfoundland that nobody had heard of before, but now is part of
Yeah.
the culture. Um, so that's one example. Canada has been a partner with the United States in all the major wars and whenever any disputes, like in all the Middle Eastern troubles, whenever the United States has tried to um, settle some dispute or get like Afghanistan and so on, Canada has been at its side throughout it. Um, so, uh, okay, the big deal that Trump has identified is that Canada is not sort of pulling
Its own weight.
its own weight in terms of the 2% commitment to defense. Uh, and they are jointly tied in. Look, if Canada is not a friend of the United States, Russia is on the United States border. It can just
Correct.
pretty much march in, and they'll be on you'll have a friend or you'll have a border that's even worse than the one that Canada offers. Um, this is a long discussion. I mean, there's a lot that
Yeah.
can be said on this topic, but just generally, um, the, the the discussion is worthwhile, but the tone and the militaristic means that are being employed, the brutality of the discussion,
Yeah.
has set off quite a reaction in Canada,
I
and
bet.
a lack of appreciation for the fact that we've been so loyal to the United States.
Yeah. Okay, so one of your other points is labor. How would a Schengen-style agreement address labor concerns between the two countries in a way that benefits both countries? And can you kind of compare that to Europe? I'm not really sure how European countries do labor exchanges amongst each other, but how would it benefit the U.S. and Canada?
Well, one of the big things is what happened in this election just last night in Ontario. There's a big car industry in on the border between the United States and Canada, where parts are going back and forth. And the big concern is with these tariffs and the hardening of relationships that the car industry is going to be set upside down. And it's going to hurt not only Canada, but also the United States car industry, which is a major industry. And if you were able to settle the dispute over, the free mobility of goods and people, labor, that would just disappear overnight. There would not be a problem in that particular area. But more generally, I think that the two major economic principles that would come into play in terms of why the union might be stronger are the division of labor argument, that you focus on the things that you're strongest on and let other people look after the things you're not very strong on. Canada's rich in resources. The United States is a developed economy, technology, um, capital intensive. So there would be more capacity to take advantage of the division of labor as one economic strength. And the other is there's this law of comparative advantage where even if, to draw a simple analogy, if let's say a surgeon, a medical surgeon, can either do brain surgery or clean his instruments. Now you can do both, and he's really good at both, but he can hire someone, pay him $10 an hour to clean his instruments, which would relieve him from having to do that and therefore spend more time doing surgery where he gets $10,000 an hour. It makes sense, even though that person who's hired may not be able to do the job quite as well as the surgeon. Nonetheless, it makes sense for the surgeon to concentrate on surgery and for the person who's cleaning to do the cleaning. For both people, take the advantage. These principles, the economic principles, merit consideration of a zone where people can go and work wherever they want, doing whatever they want, wherever the need is. So, for example, Canadian nurses could go down to the U.S. Engineers could come up to Canada. Canada, for example, is in its infancy in the aerospace industry. They're thinking about creating a NASA's North for sort of micro satellites, not the big ones that America's shooting up, but small satellites. And it could use the cooperation of NASA to build that. These are some of the examples where engineers could fly up to Canada to work, like it's out in Nova Scotia is the big plan.
Yeah.
Things of that nature. That's how it would work.
Well, last point then. Speaking of engineers and other types of labor, so we had done video before on EB visas, and it kind of became controversial here in the U.S., where some Americans were saying things like, "Well, they're going to be taking jobs," and it became very political. Well, everything becomes political, down here. So break it down for us. How would this factor in to a Schengen-style zone? How does labor that is specific, um, in terms of high knowledge engineers, doctors, professionals, extraordinary talent, how would that factor into a Schengen-style zone?
Okay, well, there are visas now in both directions for extraordinary individuals. Like if you've got a cure for COVID, uh, you're wanted wherever, Canada, US, there's no doubt about it. But you have to get the visas to go and work there. So immigration is an impediment to the free flow of individuals, ideas, and goods that is not economically justifiable. If it's possible to have a society or a area of the world where people are able to freely flow wherever. An example might be anybody who's got management skills apart from management consultants cannot go. So, for example, an American company needs a manager. There's one in Canada. But a manager under the free trade agreement at the moment cannot go down to the United States to be a manager. The same is true for Canada. An American cannot come up to Canada to be a manager because it's not in the tariff. It's not in the schedule of the professions. Another example is chiropractors. Chiropractors cannot go across the border and practice, but the need is there. It's just that it's not in the. So it's bureaucracy. It's like the frustration of having to go to the border and salute to the guy at the border.
Yeah.
When you're doing something right, it's not that you're a criminal. It's not that you're like a drug pusher or something. It's the added weight and burden of all this paperwork that can be relieved if the two countries can work together and live as allies as they have for
Yeah.
X number of years. I guess that's a quick solution
Got
or
it.
response to your question.
Yes. Well, it certainly has worked out in Europe, right? And that's one example we can look to, and that's why your article is styled this way. So people can check it out. Again, it's called Strengthening U.S. Immigration While Respecting Canada's Sovereignty. And your thesis is basically based it on what the Europeans are doing already, which has been working out amongst all these countries. And we're talking here about just two, right? All right, Andy Semotiuk, thank you so much for coming back to the LMI podcast. And everyone, check this out. It'll be on lmipodcast.com, on YouTube, and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon. And I'm going to try to be getting this stuff on a YouTube podcast now, because apparently YouTube podcast is becoming one of the biggest places that people can get their podcast downloads. So
We'll connect it to the article. Once you get it out, we'll put it on the Forbes article as a
awesome.
hyperlink.
Awesome. That'd be great. Thank you so much. Okay. Talk soon. Take
Thanks,
care.
Matt.